True power does not come from how loud you can speak, how much you can achieve, or how many people notice your success. True power is born in silence, in the quiet, sacred moments when you choose to sit with your pain instead of running from it. It's the power that comes from turning inward, from confronting the shadows you've tried to ignore, and finding compassion where you once felt shame. Healing is not a performance, it is a deeply personal, often unseen act of courage. It requires looking into the parts of yourself you've been taught to hide and realizing that those broken pieces were never flaws. They were fragments of your story waiting to be understood. When a woman begins this journey of healing, she discovers a new kind of strength, one that cannot be taken away or diminished by circumstance. She learns that her emotions are not weaknesses to be managed, but messages to be honored. Each tear becomes a teacher. Each scar becomes a reminder that she has survived what was meant to destroy her. And in that realization, she uncovers a reservoir of resilience that no one else could ever give her. This is the foundation of her true power, not in what she shows to the world, but in what she has learned to hold within herself. This inner transformation begins quietly. It starts when she stops pretending that everything is fine, when she gives herself permission to feel the weight of what she's carried, when she allows herself to grieve, to rest, and to forgive. The process isn't linear. Some days she feels strong and centered, and other days she feels like she's falling apart all over again. But even in the falling, there's progress, because healing is not about perfection. It's about presence. It's about showing up for yourself over and over again, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it hurts. As she begins to heal, she starts to hear her own voice again. The voice of the inner girl who was silenced long ago. That voice whispers truths that had been buried beneath years of doubt and fear. It reminds her of who she was before the world told her who to be. She realizes that her sensitivity is not a weakness, it's a strength. Her empathy is not a burden, it's her gift. And her softness, once seen as vulnerability, becomes the very source of her power. This awakening changes everything. She no longer needs to prove her worth or earn love through exhaustion. She stops apologizing for her boundaries and starts honoring them instead. The opinions of others lose their power because she now understands that validation from the outside world is fleeting, but self-trust is forever. She begins to move differently, not faster or louder, but with purpose, with intention, with calm confidence that comes from knowing who she is and what she deserves. In the quiet aftermath of her healing, she discovers freedom, not the kind that depends on circumstances, but the kind that comes from within. She is free from the constant comparison, free from the guilt of saying no, free from the weight of expectations that never belong to her. This freedom gives her presence an undeniable gravity. She doesn't need to demand attention, her authenticity draws it naturally. People feel her peace before she even speaks. What's extraordinary about this transformation is that it doesn't just change her. It changes the world around her. When she heals, she breaks cycles that have existed for generations. She becomes the example that younger girls and women look to and think, if she can stand in her truth, so can I. Her healing ripples outward in her relationships, her family, her community. Every healed woman becomes a lighthouse for others still lost in the dark. And yet, this power is not rooted in dominance. It is rooted in love, love for herself, love for her journey, love for the little girl who once only knew survival. Her compassion deepens, her patience grows, and her empathy expands. She understands that strength is not about never falling, it's about rising differently each time. She becomes grounded, graceful, and self-assured, dangerous not because she seeks to overpower, but because she cannot be controlled by fear anymore. The woman who has healed her inner girl no longer looks for rescue. She becomes her own savior. She no longer fights for space at tables that were never meant for her. She builds her own. Her life becomes a reflection of everything she once dreamed of as a child: safety, peace, joy, and belonging. But this time, she doesn't look for those things outside herself. She carries them within her wherever she goes. And that is what makes her truly powerful. Not the absence of pain, but the wisdom that pain revealed. She has met herself fully, without armor, and chosen to love what she found. Her power is quiet, but it is undeniable. It moves differently, speaks differently, loves differently. It's the kind of power that doesn't need to prove anything, because it simply is. When a woman begins the journey of healing her inner girl, something profound starts to happen deep within her. The layers of armor she once built for protection begin to soften. The voice that was silenced in her childhood starts to whisper again, timidly at first, then louder with each act of self-compassion. She begins to notice how often she's lived her life from a place of reaction rather than creation. Every choice she made to please others, every boundary she crossed to be accepted, all stemmed from that wounded little girl inside her who just wanted to feel safe. Healing then becomes the process of giving that little girl what she always needed: understanding, patience, and love that asks for nothing in return. As she leans into this work, she realizes that the world around her mirrors her inner state. The chaos she once blamed on everyone else begins to quiet as she tends to the chaos within. She sees that the people who once triggered her were simply reflections of her unhealed wounds. The relationships that once drained her energy now reveal lessons about her worth. Every experience, even the painful ones, starts to make sense when viewed through the lens of healing. It is in this awareness that she reclaims her power, for she no longer feels like life is something that happens to her. She becomes an active participant, a conscious creator of her own reality. This shift does not happen overnight. There are moments of deep discomfort, moments when she wishes she could return to the safety of her old patterns. But she also knows that those patterns were prisons disguised as comfort. So she keeps going. She learns to hold her emotions without judgment. The anger, the sadness, the loneliness. She lets herself cry without labeling it as weakness. She lets herself rest without guilt. In doing so, she begins to repair the relationship with herself that was broken long ago. The more she honors her truth, the less she feels the need to chase validation from others. Healing her inner girl gives her back the parts of herself she thought she had lost. The creativity that once flowed effortlessly in her youth returns with a new kind of depth. The curiosity that was buried beneath fear resurfaces as courage. She rediscovers her voice, not as an echo of others' expectations, but as the sound of her own truth. She learns to speak up, not to be heard, but to honor herself. Each word she speaks with authenticity strengthens her foundation, reminding her that she is no longer that small girl who needed permission to exist. Her confidence becomes quiet but unshakable. It's no longer tied to how she looks, what she achieves, or how others perceive her. It's rooted in self-acceptance, in the knowledge that she is worthy simply because she exists. This kind of confidence cannot be manufactured. It can only be born through healing. It gives her the courage to say no when she means no and yes when she truly means yes. It gives her the grace to walk away from what no longer aligns with her peace. It allows her to make decisions not from fear, but from clarity. With this newfound clarity, she begins to see how much of her old identity was shaped by survival. She remembers the times she made herself smaller to avoid conflict, the moments she dimmed her light to make others comfortable, the years she spent trying to prove she was enough. Healing dissolves those illusions one by one. She understands now that she was never too much. She was simply surrounded by people who couldn't handle her wholeness. This realization doesn't harden her, it liberates her. She learns that she can be kind without being compliant, loving without losing herself, and compassionate without carrying everyone's pain. As she continues to grow, she develops an unshakable sense of inner peace. The opinions that once controlled her lose their grip. The fears that once paralyzed her begin to fade. She doesn't need external validation because she has cultivated an internal home built on truth. Her energy changes, and people feel it before she even speaks. She becomes magnetic, not because she tries to attract, but because she radiates authenticity. Her presence alone becomes an act of quiet revolution in a world that constantly tells women they are not enough. Through healing, she begins to rewrite her story. The narrative of pain and survival transforms into one of purpose and strength. She no longer carries her past as a burden, but as proof of her resilience. She sees that every wound taught her something vital: compassion, self-respect, discernment. She no longer resents her past self. She thanks her for surviving long enough to reach this point of awareness. In healing her inner girl, she also begins to parent herself with gentleness and wisdom. Becoming the woman she always needed when she was young, her relationships evolve in beautiful ways. She no longer clings out of fear or emptiness. Instead, she connects from a place of wholeness. She attracts people who respect her boundaries and value her presence. She learns to love deeply without losing herself in the process. The love she gives now comes from abundance, not from the need to fill a void. And in that love, there is freedom, the freedom to be seen fully, to give without fear, to receive without guilt. This healing journey transforms her perception of power itself. Power is no longer about control or dominance. It's about alignment and authenticity. It's about the calm knowing that she can face whatever comes because she trusts herself completely. She realizes that true empowerment doesn't come from becoming someone new. It comes from remembering who she was before the world told her to forget. And in that remembrance, she becomes whole again, walking through life with quiet confidence, deep compassion, and an unshakable sense of self. When a woman heals her inner girl, something extraordinary happens to the way she moves through the world. She no longer looks outward for validation because she has found the source of it within herself. All the years she spent chasing approval from parents, partners, friends, society, start to dissolve in the light of her self-awareness. She recognizes that the constant search to be seen, to be understood, to be loved was never truly about others. It was about her own unhealed need to feel enough. When she finally meets that need from within, everything changes. Her energy shifts, her posture straightens, her words carry weight because they come from truth, not performance. It's a quiet but undeniable transformation. She no longer asks, "Do they like me?" But instead, "Do I like how I feel when I'm around them?" She stops trying to fit into places where she was only tolerated. The need to prove her worth fades, replaced by a steady sense of knowing that she already possesses everything she once sought outside herself. This realization frees her from the exhausting cycle of people pleasing and self-abandonment. She begins to live life on her own terms, not out of rebellion, but out of reverence for her own peace. She doesn't need applause, she needs alignment. As she sheds the need for validation, she also releases the fear of rejection. She understands now that rejection does not mean she is unworthy. It simply means that she is being redirected toward what truly belongs to her. Her self-worth no longer depends on whether someone stays or leaves. The departure of others no longer breaks her because she no longer depends on them to hold her together. Her sense of identity is rooted in her own presence, her own voice, her own heart. And in that steadiness, she discovers the beauty of solitude, not as loneliness, but as sacred space to reconnect with herself. The way she communicates also evolves. She speaks with clarity instead of hesitation. She no longer sugarcoats her truth to keep the peace because she understands that honesty is an act of respect, both to herself and to others. She doesn't raise her voice to be heard. Her calm assertiveness is enough. People listen to her not because she demands it, but because she radiates authenticity. Every word she says comes from integrity, and that energy commands quiet respect. Her language shifts from self-doubt to self-trust, from apology to affirmation, from insecurity to grounded confidence. This transformation also reshapes her boundaries. She learns that boundaries are not barriers meant to isolate her, but sacred lines that protect her energy and her peace. She understands that saying no does not make her unkind, it makes her honest. She no longer stretches herself thin to accommodate everyone else's comfort. She gives herself permission to rest, to withdraw, to protect her emotional well-being without guilt. These boundaries become expressions of self-love, quiet declarations that say, "I honor myself enough to choose peace over pleasing." And through those boundaries, she reclaims time, energy, and space to nurture her own growth. Her relationships begin to mirror this inner change. She no longer attracts chaos or clings to the promise of potential. She gravitates toward people who meet her where she is, who reciprocate her energy, and who honor her truth. The more she values herself, the more her circle evolves. Connections that once felt necessary begin to fall away naturally, making room for relationships built on mutual respect and emotional safety. Love no longer feels like a battlefield. It becomes a space of expansion where she can be both soft and strong, both independent and connected. With validation no longer her driving force, she finds fulfillment in her own growth. Her goals and dreams shift from seeking recognition to seeking purpose. She measures success not by applause, but by authenticity, by how aligned she feels with her values and how much peace she carries in her heart. She begins to understand that happiness is not something to be achieved, but something to be cultivated daily through gratitude, boundaries, and self-awareness. The life she once built to impress others slowly transforms into a life that truly belongs to her. Even her definition of love changes. She stops confusing intensity with intimacy. She learns that love is not supposed to hurt or drain her. It's supposed to nurture her, challenge her, and help her grow. She stops accepting crumbs because she now knows the full meal exists within her own heart. She no longer mistakes attachment for devotion. She no longer confuses being chosen with being valued. Her healed self knows that real love does not require her to shrink. It invites her to expand. Her self-talk transforms as well. The harsh inner critic that once echoed in her mind begins to soften. She replaces "I'm not enough" with "I am learning," and "I should be" with "I already am." She treats herself with the same compassion she once reserved for everyone else. She celebrates her small wins, forgives her missteps, and learns to move through life with gentleness instead of judgment. This inner kindness becomes her greatest strength, allowing her to grow without fear of failure. And as she continues to live from this healed space, her very presence becomes an act of quiet power. She doesn't need to announce her transformation. It speaks for itself. There's a steadiness in her energy, a confidence that doesn't shout but resonates deeply. She carries herself differently, not as someone waiting to be chosen, but as someone who knows she already is. Her life no longer revolves around being seen by others. It revolves around seeing herself clearly. And in that clarity, she becomes untouchable, not because she builds walls, but because she finally knows her worth from the inside out. When a woman heals her inner girl, her understanding of boundaries shifts from a defensive reaction to an act of deep self-respect. She begins to see that boundaries are not walls meant to keep others out, but bridges meant to keep her energy balanced and her heart protected. For years, she may have believed that saying yes to everyone was a form of kindness, but now she realizes that every untrue yes was a quiet betrayal of herself. She starts to recognize the power of a sincere no, the peace that comes from honoring her limits, and the freedom that follows when she no longer feels responsible for managing everyone else's emotions. At first, setting boundaries feels uncomfortable. She's been conditioned to equate self-sacrifice with love, to think that being agreeable makes her worthy. But as she practices holding her truth, she starts to feel her strength returning. She learns that the discomfort she feels when asserting herself is not guilt, it's growth. She notices how people respond differently when she stops overextending herself. Some grow closer, appreciating her honesty. Others pull away, revealing that their connection depended on her silence. This clarity, though painful, becomes her liberation. She begins to understand that protecting her peace will sometimes mean disappointing others, and she accepts that as part of her evolution. As her boundaries strengthen, she finds new levels of clarity in her relationships. She begins to distinguish between people who are truly supportive and those who are drawn to her for what she can give them. She becomes aware of the emotional patterns she once mistook for love, the caretaking, the rescuing, the overgiving. She no longer confuses being needed with being valued. Her compassion remains intact, but it now has structure. She can hold space for others without losing herself in their pain. Her empathy becomes cleaner, more intentional, no longer entangled in guilt or obligation. This transformation is not about closing herself off. It's about opening herself wisely. She learns that vulnerability without boundaries leads to depletion, but vulnerability with discernment leads to connection. Her love becomes more powerful because it is now a choice, not a duty. She loves from a place of fullness rather than fear. When she gives her time or energy, it's because she truly wants to, not because she feels she must. This authenticity deepens every bond she has with family, friends, partners, and even with herself. In this new awareness, she begins to see how her old patterns of self-abandonment were never acts of love, but attempts to earn belonging. She remembers the times she stayed silent when she wanted to speak, smiled when she wanted to cry, or gave when she had nothing left to give. Those moments, she realizes, were lessons in disguise, each one teaching her where she had forgotten her own worth. Now, she chooses differently. She chooses to listen to her body, to trust her intuition, and to believe that she doesn't need to explain her boundaries to anyone who genuinely respects her. Her relationship with herself deepens in ways she never thought possible. She no longer seeks permission to rest. She no longer apologizes for needing time alone. Her solitude becomes sacred, a space where she can reconnect with her energy and listen to the whispers of her soul. She finds beauty in saying no, not because she's rejecting others, but because she's honoring herself. Every boundary she enforces becomes a declaration that she is no longer available for what drains her spirit. She learns that peace is not something she finds externally, it's something she protects daily through conscious choices. Over time, her confidence begins to reflect this new alignment. She walks differently, speaks differently, and even breathes differently. There is a quiet assurance in her presence, not arrogance, but certainty. She no longer rushes to fill silences or explain her feelings to those who are unwilling to understand. She realizes that she can be both gentle and firm, both open and discerning. Her softness is no longer a liability, but a strength tempered by experience. Every boundary she sets becomes an invisible crown, a symbol of the self-respect she fought to reclaim. The people around her begin to notice the shift. Some admire it, others misunderstand it. But she no longer shapes herself according to their comfort. She knows that not everyone will celebrate her boundaries, and she's learned to be at peace with that. She no longer measures her worth by how agreeable she can be. Instead, she measures it by how authentically she can live. Each time she chooses her peace over people pleasing, she reinforces a new truth, that protecting her energy is not selfish, it is essential. Her boundaries also redefine how she engages with the world. She becomes intentional with her commitments, mindful with her words, and selective with her energy. She no longer rushes into situations that feel heavy or misaligned. Her discernment sharpens, and she trusts it without second guessing. She starts to notice how her peace expands when she honors herself first. This balance allows her to show up more powerfully for others, not out of depletion, but from genuine abundance. Her life becomes lighter, simpler, and more meaningful because she no longer carries what isn't hers. As she continues to honor her boundaries, her sense of inner safety grows stronger. She feels grounded in who she is, no longer pulled in every direction by expectations or guilt. Her life begins to flow in harmony with her values. The relationships that remain in her life are richer, more authentic, and built on mutual respect. She doesn't need to protect her heart with walls anymore because her boundaries have become her quiet shield. A reflection of her healing, her self-awareness, and her commitment to her own peace. When a woman heals her inner girl, something profound begins to unfold that stretches far beyond herself. The healing she does ripples outward into generations, both backward and forward in time. She begins to see that her pain was never isolated, it was inherited, passed down through stories, silences, and survival patterns. The fear she carried, the doubts she internalized, the tendency to shrink herself, they weren't born in her. They were echoes of her mother's voice, her grandmother's struggle, her great-grandmother's endurance. When she chooses to face her wounds instead of burying them, she begins to break those inherited cycles of silence and self-abandonment. Her healing becomes an act of rebellion against generations of women who were told to endure quietly. In the process of healing, she starts to feel the weight of everything she's been carrying, not just her own pain, but the pain of the women before her who never got the chance to speak their truth. She feels their exhaustion in her bones, their longing in her heart, their fear in her hesitation. But she also feels their strength. She realizes that they survived so she could thrive. She understands that every step she takes toward wholeness honors the sacrifices they made in silence. The tears she sheds are not signs of weakness. They are the release of generations of unspoken grief finally finding a voice. She becomes both a bridge and a healer, rewriting the story for those who came before and those who will come after. As she grows more aware, she begins to understand how deeply culture, family, and society shaped her perception of self-worth. She recalls being told to be nice, to be small, to be agreeable, lessons that were never meant to empower her, only to make her manageable. But now she questions those messages. She refuses to pass them on. She decides that the young girls watching her will learn something different, that they can be kind without being silent, strong without being hard, and confident without needing permission. Her healing becomes a living example, teaching others that it's possible to carry love without carrying the weight of everyone else's expectations. She notices how her healing begins to transform her relationships with family. The conversations that once felt impossible slowly begin to open. The blame she once carried turns into understanding. The resentment she once held softens into compassion. She sees her parents not just as authority figures, but as people shaped by their own wounds. This doesn't mean she excuses harm, but she begins to recognize the humanity behind it. Through this awareness, she stops the cycle of reacting and begins the practice of responding with empathy, but also with boundaries. The healing that once felt personal now becomes collective, touching everyone connected to her story. The impact of her healing reaches the next generation as well. She becomes conscious of the way she speaks to children, her own or those around her. She chooses words that affirm instead of criticize, that empower instead of diminish. She listens more deeply, understanding that what children need most is to be seen and accepted for who they are. She creates the kind of emotional safety she never had growing up. Every time she chooses patience over control, love over shame, she is rewriting emotional DNA. The next generation inherits her strength instead of her fear, her trust instead of her silence. This shift also changes the way she interacts with the world. She starts to move through life with a sense of purpose, knowing that her healing is not just self-care, it's community care. The work she does on herself becomes a gift to the collective, because healed women create safer spaces wherever they go. They raise kinder children, build healthier relationships, and influence systems in subtle but powerful ways. The ripple of her inner work extends far beyond what she can see. Her compassion deepens and her awareness grows. She begins to understand that healing herself is one of the most radical acts of change she can offer to humanity. Through this process, she learns that breaking generational patterns is not glamorous. It is lonely work, often misunderstood. There are days when she feels the weight of it pressing down on her shoulders. But even on those days, she knows she's doing something sacred. She's creating a future where emotional honesty replaces shame, where connection replaces avoidance, where love replaces fear. She no longer measures her progress by how fast she moves forward, but by how consciously she chooses to stop repeating the past. In moments of reflection, she begins to see how healing has softened her edges without weakening her strength. She no longer reacts with anger alone, but with understanding. She no longer hides from pain, but learns from it. Her gentleness becomes powerful because it's rooted in truth. People around her feel the difference. Her presence carries peace. Without preaching, without demanding, she inspires others to look within, to face their own shadows, to begin their own journey of becoming whole. As she heals, she realizes that she has become the woman her ancestors prayed for, the one who has the freedom to choose her path, to speak her truth, to live without apology. But she also recognizes the responsibility that comes with that freedom. She knows that every healed choice she makes, every time she forgives herself, every time she sets a boundary, every time she chooses love over fear, she is planting seeds for a future where women no longer inherit the wounds of the past. Her healing becomes a legacy, written not in words but in energy, in presence, in the way she lives her life. And through it all, she carries her inner girl gently within her, no longer as a wounded child, but as a cherished companion. Together, they walk through life hand in hand, the woman and the girl, the present and the past, the healed and the healing, each step forward echoing through time, rewriting what it means for generations of women to be free. When a woman hears the call to heal her inner girl, there comes a moment when she must choose between comfort and transformation. It's not an easy choice, because healing asks her to unlearn everything she thought she knew about safety. It asks her to look closely at her patterns, her fears, and the stories she tells herself to stay small. Choosing healing means walking away from what's familiar, even when it feels safe, and stepping into the unknown parts of herself. It is a choice to stop running from the pain and to finally turn toward it with open eyes. The process is not about becoming someone new, but about remembering who she was before the world told her to forget. In the beginning, the work feels overwhelming. She notices the resistance rising in her chest, the part of her that wants to hide behind business or distraction. The mind will find every excuse to avoid discomfort. But healing asks for stillness. It asks for presence. It asks her to sit in the quiet and listen to the voice she has ignored for so long. The voice that says, "I need rest," or "I need to be heard," or "I'm not okay." Listening to that voice feels strange at first, because for years she's been taught to silence it. But as she listens more, the noise of the outside world fades, and her own truth begins to sound clearer than ever before. She starts to notice the ways she has been surviving rather than living. She sees how often she's chosen approval over authenticity, how many times she's put her needs last in the name of love. Healing begins when she finally admits that she's tired. Tired of pretending, tired of performing, tired of carrying what doesn't belong to her. This honesty is painful, but it's also freeing. For the first time, she stops waiting for someone else to come and fix what's broken. She realizes that the power to change her life has always been within her, quietly waiting for her to choose herself. As she starts choosing healing, her world begins to shift in small but significant ways. The things that used to drain her no longer hold the same power. The people who took advantage of her silence begin to fall away. She starts setting boundaries not as a form of defense, but as an act of devotion to herself. Her days become less about proving and more about being. She finds joy in the simple act of being present, in her breath, in her body, in her truth. The chaos that once consumed her begins to quiet, not because life becomes easier, but because she no longer meets it from a place of fear. This process is not linear. Some days she feels strong and grounded, and others she feels like she's back at the beginning. But even on those hard days, she recognizes that healing is happening beneath the surface. It's not about perfection, it's about persistence. She learns to celebrate the small victories. The moment she says no without guilt, the morning she wakes up without dread, the time she catches herself speaking kindly to her reflection. These moments, though quiet, are evidence that she is transforming. They are the roots of lasting change taking hold beneath the soil of her soul. In choosing healing over hiding, she begins to rebuild her relationship with vulnerability. She realizes that being open doesn't make her weak, it makes her whole. She starts to share her truth without shame, not for validation, but for release. Her openness becomes a form of courage, showing others that strength is not about having it all together, but about having the bravery to fall apart and rebuild yourself with love. Through her vulnerability, she creates connection, real, raw human connection that reminds her she's not alone. The more she heals, the more she learns to trust herself. She begins to rely on her intuition instead of external advice. Her body becomes her compass, her emotions become her guides. She no longer suppresses her feelings to make others comfortable. She allows herself to feel deeply, knowing that emotions are not enemies, but messengers. In trusting her inner voice, she discovers a sense of peace that can't be found anywhere outside of herself. This trust becomes the foundation upon which she rebuilds her life, one intentional choice at a time. As she continues this journey, she discovers that healing doesn't always look like light and ease. Sometimes it looks like tears, solitude, and letting go of everything that no longer aligns. Sometimes it means outgrowing people she once loved, shedding identities that no longer fit, and facing truths that once terrified her. But even in the pain, she feels something sacred, a growing alignment between who she is and who she's becoming. The distance between her wounds and her wisdom begins to close, and she moves through life with a quiet confidence that cannot be shaken. With each layer she sheds, she grows lighter. The version of her that once doubted, once feared, once settled for less begins to dissolve. What remains is a woman who understands that healing isn't about erasing the past, it's about integrating it. It's about holding her younger self with compassion and saying, "You did the best you could." It's about forgiving herself for the times she didn't know better. It's about choosing to move forward with softness and strength coexisting in her heart. She becomes both the healer and the healed, the protector and the protected. And through this ongoing choice, this daily act of courage, she becomes fully alive. The same woman who once felt powerless now walks with intention. She no longer hides from her truth or shrinks in the presence of others. She has faced her pain and found her power beneath it. She has learned that healing is not a destination but a way of being, a commitment to keep choosing herself again and again, no matter how many times life tests her resolve.